I don't think Sarah needs much of an introduction. I think most people have come across this GP turned naturopath, recognizing that too much of GP land is constrained by the way the NHS works. But I'm sure you've got more to say on that yourself, Sarah. She's certainly been an advocate for, well, natural treatment in the sense of what you eat makes a massive difference to your health rather than what medicines you pump in. So really, I'm going to hand over to Sarah. You've got a number of books up. I referred to one or two of them in the newsletter. I think I referred to 3 of them in the newsletter, but there are more. You've got a number of things going on your website, but we've got the real thing. We've got you in person. So I can hand over to you. That will be terrific. And thank you very much.
Well, no, well, thank you, Hugo. And I'm just sorry I never met Dr. Chandy, because he was obviously the perfect GP, asking all the right questions and doing all the right things. My history is that I qualified in 1981 and worked in general practice for 20 years, but increasingly found that I didn't have the clinical freedoms that I needed to be an effective doctor. So in 2000, I went into independent medicine, working as an independent GP or as a naturopath. And the main emphasis, or the main difference in what I'm doing now, is I'm asking the question why. The problem with NHS medicine, and particularly the drug prescribing doctors, is it's all been reduced to symptom suppression with drugs. The doctors are not asking the question why. What are the mechanisms by which that person is ill? And the point here is, if you know what the mechanisms are, then that has obvious implications for management. So we're going to talk about dementia today. So I've got some slides that I shall whiz through, and having whizzed through those, we can then do some questions. There we go. Okay, so I hope you can see those slides. Okay, so the point about dementia is that if you, it is completely preventable. And even with the early symptoms and signs, or maybe some more advanced dementia, it is completely reversible. Now, don't wait to go to see your doctor to diagnose dementia. It's obvious when someone is developing dementia. I don't need to tell you what the symptoms of those are. But what we have to really ask about is, what is the mechanism of dementia? And the key point to remember is that dementia is not a diagnosis. Dementia is a clinical picture. So many doctors go wrong in this respect. So, for example, irritable bowel syndrome is not a diagnosis, it's a clinical picture. We have to ask the question why. Arthritis is not a diagnosis, it's a clinical picture. We have to ask the question why. And the same is true as dementia. Dementia is just a clinical picture, and we have to ask the questions why. And I believe these are the main pathological drivers of dementia. And they may be one or more than one of these things. And number one is energy delivery mechanisms. And we'll move on to that. And number two is blood supply. And that, of course, is part of energy delivery mechanisms, because if you can't get the blood to the brain, if you can't get the oxygen and the fuel to the brain, it's not going to work. Poisoning, and I'll whiz through that. Prion disease, and that is now Alzheimer's disease is a dementia caused by prions, but so many people use the word dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. They are different. And then, of course, you can get dementia because of a chronic infection. The one we all know about from the past is syphilis, but there are many infections which now drive dementia, and these are not being routinely looked for or tested for. And then, of course, physical damage to the brain, obviously things like tumours and head injury. So let's just whiz through some of these mechanisms. Now, the important thing is that the brain, although it weighs just 2% of body weight, it consumes 20% of all the energy generated by the body. You know, it uses a massive amount of energy. And obviously, we all know that, with sleep deprivation, acute infection, alcohol, drug poisoning, these are obvious causes of dementia. We call them an acute confusional state. And if I drank too much gin one night, not that I'm a gin drinker, then I would develop an acute dementia. But we all know what the diagnosis is. Silly girl, sleep it off and she'll be fine in the morning. So the point is, much of this is reversible. And in addition to energy delivery mechanisms, the ATP molecule, which is the energy molecule, is also a neurotransmitter in its own right. So unless you've got plentiful ATP present, i.e. as a result of energy delivery, then the neurotransmitters can't work. And this means that improving energy delivery mechanisms and ATP levels is also the starting point to treat not just dementia, but all other neurological, psychiatric and psychological disease. Anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, all respond well to these interventions. Okay. So let's look at blood supply, and of course, if you haven't got the blood supply to the brain, then energy delivery is going to be impaired. And the main cause of this, of course, is arteriosclerosis, which is, as you all noted, hardening of the arteries, plaque disease. Now, the point is this is not caused by high cholesterol. We are being completely misled by the powers that be, by Big Pharma and Big Food, into this ridiculous and risible hypothesis that high cholesterol, high fat diets cause high cholesterol, which cause heart disease and arteriosclerosis. Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. Fabulous book, if you want to read it, is Malcolm Kendrick's book, The Great Cholesterol Con. He's brought out another one recently called The Clot Thickens. He's a great wag, is our Malcolm. And he details the mechanism by which arteries are damaged. And here are the mechanisms here. Carbohydrate-based diets is number one. We all know about smoking. I'm not putting the obvious stuff in. Carbohydrate-based diets is absolutely number one. And then homocysteine, we should all know what our homocysteine is. It needs to lie between 5 and 10. And you can get that. Your GP won't tell you about homocysteine, neither will he or she measure that. You have to do it yourself. And you can do that with a company called CeraScreen, CERA screen. You can do it yourself homocysteine. Really important. We should all know what our homocysteine is. And of course, chronic inflammation, which comes from infection and allergy. But it's not high cholesterol. As I say, the higher your cholesterol is, the longer you live. I like people to run cholesterol certainly above 6, ideally 7 or 8, possibly even 9. Cholesterol is not a dangerous molecule. Okay, and then we have poisoning by heavy metals. So number one is probably aluminium, and many of you probably know the work that was done up in, I think it was Sheffield, where patients there who had renal failure were developing dialysis dementia. 10% of patients who were receiving renal dialysis went demented. And the reason for this was the water that was being used in the dialysis machines. Now, this should, of course, be good quality spring water or distilled water. But at the time, they were using tap water. Now, water that comes off the Peak District is stained brown by the peat. And in order to clarify that, the water companies put in alum, which is aluminium. So alum or aluminium treated water poisoned these renal dialysis patients. And that was an early clue that aluminium was a big player. And as a result of that, aluminium cooking pans went out of the window, but we're still using aluminium foil. We're still using aluminium deodorants. And they should be banned. Don't use them. Really nasty, toxic chemical. Some of you may be aware of the work of Chris Exley, who's a wonderful scientist who's demonstrated how aluminium in vaccines is driving our epidemics of autism. And as a result of going public on this, he lost his job, he lost his funding, and his research was trashed by the powers that be. But aluminium, very important. He wrote a lovely book called Mr. Aluminium. Do recommend it. Another heavy metal that we know drives dementia is mercury. And of course, the main source of mercury is in dental amalgam fillings. And I've come to the view that nobody should be walking around with dental amalgam in their teeth, because although dental amalgam is technically it's very good for teeth, biochemically and pathologically, it's a disaster, because amalgam is not a solid, it's a liquid, and the mercury evaporates off from the day that the fillings are put in, and that drives dementia. And then lead, of course, we know that lead drives cognitive dysfunction. The main source of that used to be leaded petrol. That's now been banned, of course, but even lead water pipes can be a problem for people living in old houses. So always, think about, possible metal contamination. And we can measure this. If you want to measure that, it can be done on a urine test, but it has to be done with a chelating agent. Otherwise, the metals don't come out. So again, if anybody wants to get that test done, drop me an email and I can set that up for you. And then, of course, poisoning by pesticides. Again, has been a well-recognized association between exposure to organophosphate pesticides and cognitive dysfunction with dementia. The main ones are organophosphates are the real problem. And organophosphates, the mechanism by which we generate energy is called oxidative phosphorylation. And should we be surprised if organophosphates inhibit that? No, of course we shouldn't, and of course they do. And although organophosphates, the toxicity of this is now being recognized increasingly, they've been replaced by glyphosate, which is also an organophosphate. And there's a wonderful book written by Stephanie Seneff that describes the toxicity of glyphosate. These frames here come from her book, or I've pulled them from her book, just to illustrate how toxic glyphosate is. I'm not going to read these out because I'm quite sure you're all capable of reading, but it has multiple malign effects on the brain. It's disastrous for brain chemistry. It inhibits thyroid function. We can't make melatonin, and that will drive insomnia if you're being poisoned by glyphosate. It's been patented as an antibiotic, and 54% of the microbes in the gut are sensitive to glyphosate. And now we don't know much about the gut microbiome, but what we do know is that the more diverse it is, the healthier you are. We also know there's a direct link between the gut and the brain. You've got a healthy gut, you've got a healthy brain, and vice versa. In fact, some lovely work done by a Japanese researcher called Nishihara has demonstrated that if you've got the wrong microbes fermenting in the upper gut, and of course it's a carbohydrate diet that causes that, then you find these microbes in the brain. And in the brain, they have the potential to ferment out neurotransmitters like dopamine and adrenaline into LSD and amphetamine-like drugs. And this is the basis of psychosis. So lots of nasty things that glyphosate does there. It inhibits the production of digestive enzymes, and so we malabsorb. And if we malabsorb, then we're not going to get the goodness from food that we need for the business of healing and repair. It's a metal chelator, so it binds up friendly minerals like zinc, copper, magnesium, and other trace elements, and therefore they're not available for the immune system to use. It interferes with protein synthesis, and that manifests in a whole range of conditions. Collagen, for example, we're seeing so much hypermobility in EDS, and my guess is this has something to do with glyphosate. It inhibits oxidative phosphorylation, so we can't make energy efficiently, so all cell processes will go slow in the presence of glyphosate. It impairs the body's ability to supply sulfate, which is necessary for the synthesis of all neurotransmitters. So, of course, glyphosate is going to be implicated in dementia and Parkinson's. It inhibits methylation pathways. This is why we want to know what our homocysteine is, because without homocysteine, we can't heal and repair. And abnormal high homocysteine is implicated in heart disease, cancer, dementia, degenerative disease, and so on. So, it has many nasty and malign effects. And here's an example of the carcinogenesis of glyphosate. This poor man, Dwayne Johnson, used Roundup, which is one of the forms of glyphosate, and aged 42 was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He successfully sued Monsanto for $78 million. And there are another 100,000 cancer patients in the pipeline waiting to be settled. So even the courts recognize that glyphosate is driving disease. And my view is there's never been a more important time to eat organic. I know the organic foods are expensive and all that, but do your best to eat foods as cleanly as is possible. And then we have dementia that's driven by prions. Now, prions I think of as protein cancers. They are proteins in the body which are normally present, and then they get distorted by environmental factors into a molecule that cannot be broken down and builds up. And of course, if a molecule builds up in the brain, it occupies space because there's only so much space in the bony cavity of the brain, and that disrupts the brain. And these diseases, Alzheimer's disease, the prion disease, ditto Parkinson's disease, motor neurone, Yacob-Creutzfeldt disease, multisystem atrophy, etc., etc., etc. And these are where do prions come from? Well, the early cases of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease came from patients receiving ECT when the electrodes being put on their scalps were not properly sterilized. And there was one patient who had CJD, and those infected electrodes went on to the next patient and the next and the next. So that was a real major clue that these are transmissible. Human growth hormone, this is another example of children who were being treated with human growth hormone, and that human growth hormones was taken from human cadavers, from pituitary extracts from dead people. And some of those people died from CJD, and as a result, those children developed the same. It doesn't come from eating brains. And you're probably all aware of the 4 tribe out in Papua New Guinea who developed kuru, which is transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. But it's interestingly that the men who ate the brains did not develop kuru, but the women who prepared the brains for cooking, they did. And they prepare it like a kebab, putting the brains onto a little bamboo spicule. And the idea is they accidentally cut themselves with these little spicules and thereby inoculate themselves with the infected material. So the important thing is you can only get these things through injection. You can't get it from eating. So when the BSE crisis came along, it was not eating meat that was ever going to be the problem. Okay, the other interesting thing about prion disorders is they all have a toxic associate. So Alzheimer's disease, for example, the prion involved with that is called amyloid beta, and we know that's associated with aluminium toxicity, as we've discussed already. Certainly mercury toxicity, and you all know about the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. That was almost certainly his mechanism. But all these infections too can drive prion disorders. So Lyme disease, toxoplasma, herpes virus 1, etc., etc., etc. Probably Helicobacter pylori and others. Parkinson's disease is associated with another prion called alpha-synuclein, and that can be caused by too much manganese, as demonstrated by the manganese miners in South Africa. Again, organophosphate pesticides, we've touched on that. Again, infections, Helicobacter pylori, Borrelia, etc., that too can drive Parkinson's disease. Motor neurone disease is SOD1 prion. And again, that's associated with manganese poisoning. Whoops, a daisy. I'm not very good at this, am I? Multisystem atrophy, it's another prion disorder, etc., etc., etc. So poisonings drive prion disease, and we should be thinking about them, avoiding them, and diagnosing them where possible. And then, of course, there's physical damage to the brain, head injuries. These are all the footballers. In fact, in the early 1980s, I can remember a professional footballer coming to me then with a dementia. And I said to him, are you in contact with your team? How many others have got neurological disease? And many of them described Parkinson's disease, dementia, or whatever. And it's now being considered an industrial disease in footballers and in boxers. And of course, we all know about Muhammad Ali, who developed Parkinson's disease. Bless his cotton stocks. Okay, so the point is, and we don't have a good effective treatment for prion disorders. We do for other aspects of dementia, but not prion disorders, and therefore prevention is better than cure. Now, there's a wonderful website set up by Patrick Holford called Food for the Brain. And there he states that dementia is 99% preventable. So, don't wait till you've got the symptoms, stop it from developing in the first place. I mean, when I was at medical school in the 1970s, Alzheimer's was an unknown word. Dementia was rare and uncommon. This is a disease of the last 20 or 30 years, and it is largely avoidable. And the number one thing is a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. That is absolutely vital, and I'll come on to the reasons why in a moment. Secondly, B vitamins, and everybody should know what their homocysteine status is. Because if your homocysteine is too high, then that is a major risk factor for dementia and also cancer and also heart disease. We should all know what our homocysteine is. And then fish oils. Fish oils, again, are highly protective, but the fish in our oceans are all polluted with pesticides and with toxic metals. So it must be a fish oil that's been cleaned up and filtered with activated charcoal. So those are the how we go about avoiding dementia. And then we have to think about energy generation in the body. So if I had anybody with early symptoms of dementia, of course, I would want to test for toxic metals and detox those toxic metals. But at the same time, I would also be looking at energy delivery mechanisms. And the analogy I like to use is the car analogy. And for our car to run, there are 5 important players. First of all, the right fuel in the tank. And that's all about diet and gut function. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. Now, this is not an Atkins diet. It's not high in protein. It's normal protein. But we should fuel our body from fat and from fiber, and we should have low levels of sugars and carbohydrates. And the Western diets, sadly, are now carbohydrate based, and it's porridge and toast and cereals for breakfast, and then mid-morning snack of crisps and biscuits and cake, and then lunchtime is sandwiches, and supper and tea is cake and blah, 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 and supper is bread and potato and pasta and so on. You know, it's not a good diet for longevity. And then obviously we need oxygen for that to burn that fuel, and many people don't breathe correctly. And then we need an engine to burn that fuel. And some of you may know this is my special area of interest. We need a good mitochondrial function. And then the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox. And we need to service and repair our engines during sleep. And sleep is so important. Lack of good quality sleep is a major risk factor for dementia, heart disease, and cancer. Okay. So just a little quick snippet about magnesium. Magnesium is so important, and we are all magnesium deficient, probably because there is a one-way cycle of trace elements, including magnesium, from the soil into plants, into animals, into us, and then we chuck it away into the rivers and the seas, and we don't recycle it. And magnesium deficiency is a pandemic, and magnesium is essential for so many disorders. We need at least 200 milligrams of magnesium daily, and also vitamin D for its absorption. If you haven't got vitamin D there, you cannot absorb magnesium. And my view is we should all be consuming 10,000 international units of vitamin D. And during the summer, you get as much sunshine as you possibly can. Not so much that you burn, but sufficient sunshine so we all go nice and brown. And do not use suntan lotions. They're absolutely lethal. Okay. So dementia responds fantastically well to these regimes, and I call these regimes Groundhog chronic. And if you want to look at the overview of what they all are all about, then that is the link to go to. Consultant neurologist Dale Bredesen, California, he reverses dementia with all these interventions. And there are the papers where he has demonstrated that. I mean, if these mechanisms were not regimes of diets and supplements and things that and lifestyle changes, if these regimes were just a pill, it would be the headline news in every newspaper in the world. But of course, the newspapers are run by Big Pharma, so this good information does not get into the papers. But the point here is dementia, caught early, is reversible. Again, homocysteine, I know I keep banging on about that, but it's very important, and we should all know what our homocysteine is, and that's what we do. That's how we correct the homocysteine. We take some B vitamins. Again, they're very cheap. The side effects are zero, and one of the most important one, of course, is vitamin B12. And B12 is one of my favorite multitasking tools. It does so much good. It's essential for mitochondrial function and improve energy delivery mechanisms. And so many people tell me that when vitamin B12 injections, they start giving themselves their daily injections, their foggy brains and their mood are so much improved. And my guess is much of the mechanisms arrive because they help to detox toxic metals and other such via the methylation cycle. Without methylation, we can't synthesize protein. And methylation is how genes are switched on and off. So B12 vital for healing and repair. It's directly toxic to some viruses. It's of known benefit in hepatitis C and probably others as well. It's an anti-inflammatory. And we know that all pathology is associated with inflammation. And Professor Martin Poole has demonstrated the mechanism of this, what he calls the O-no-O cycle. Peroxynitrate is a toxic molecule, and this is mopped up effectively with vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is one of my favorite multitasking tools. And the joy of vitamin B12 is it is completely safe. As a colleague of mine commented, the only way you could kill yourself with vitamin B12 is to drown in the stuff. So anybody can purchase B12 from my website, and anybody can inject themselves with B12, and it's a very easy, safe thing to do. And those are the regimes that I recommend. And of course, your lovely doctor, Dr. Chandy, he was a proper doctor because he didn't just rely on tests. He used his clinical acumen. And he recognized that when we're looking at disease, we should be asking the question, why? Why does this person have this condition? And vitamin B12 deficiency is extremely common. And my guess is that part of the reason it's so common is because we do not consume evolutionarily correct diets. We consume diets which are high in sugars and high in carbohydrates, and that means we have an upper fermenting gut. So the upper gut should be a sterile, digesting gut for the business of dealing with proteins and digesting fats. The lower gut, the microbiome, yes, that should be a fermenting gut, and much good is done by that. But if we have an upper fermenting gut full of bacteria and yeast, then any B12 we consume gets gobbled up by those bacteria and yeast. It's malabsorbed. And I think that vitamin B12 deficiency is extremely common, if not pandemic. And that's why it's such an important tool. So I know I've rather whizzed through those, but I hope that leaves us with lots of time so that I can answer questions, because it's much more fun answering questions than giving rather dull lectures. So Hugo, have you got any questions that you'd like me to go through?
No, do come through with a whole lot of questions for Sarah.
So so Carrie's got a thumbs up. Well done. Does that mean you want to ask a question, Carrie?
Oh, thank you for that, Sarah. That was very informative. And unfortunately, we've got a fair few sufferers in our family. Just one particular question. One particular family member is quite young, in her 60s, and has got the Terry Pratchett's form of dementia. And I just wondered if it was a similar thing to the normal Alzheimer's and dementia, or is that something that's quite separate?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not sure what Terry Pratchett's form of dementia was.
It was very rare, but I don't know either.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter. The point is,
right.
we have to do it all. And getting people well is like building a house. And for your house to work, you've got to have the foundation stones, which is the diet, and then obviously you have the walls. It's the B vitamins, it's the detoxing the heavy metals, eating organic food. It's putting in place as many of these interventions as we can. Right. And you'll have a very good chance of reversing that dementia. And don't wait until it gets severe. I mean, if somebody's having a dementia in their 60s, I can almost guarantee they've got a homocysteine problem, because that would drive that. So do get the homocysteine checked from Sarah's screen. And on that PowerPoint, there's details of the B vitamins that we need to reduce that. But do it all. Certainly start B12 injections. Do check for homocysteine. Do measure for toxic metals. Think about the way that it started, because funny enough, I've had a patient recently who developed a very acute dementia, and it was due to Lyme disease. And by treating him with intravenous antibiotics, his dementia completely resolved, and he's now as right as rain.
Amazing, that's brilliant, lovely, thank you. And is that something that if they were wanting support and advice from, is that something that you offer yourself?
Of course, but I'm rather booked up at the moment. But if I could certainly put them in touch with a physician who's experienced with this. So there's Rachel Brown, for example, who's a consultant psychiatrist based up in Edinburgh. She runs an excellent service, metabolic psychiatry or root cause psychiatry, and she treats many patients with dementia with great results. She's a great advocate of the carnivore diet. And she herself has been a carnivorous, pure carnivore for 4 years. And although the paleo-ketogenic diet, you might think that's the starting point, actually that's the finishing point. Some people need to go carnivore in order to really get ahead of the game, identify their allergies, reduce their upper fermenting gut, and get a quick result. So Rachel Brown would also be a wonderful doctor to consult.
Lovely. And can I just one more thing? If it's already progressed and they've already got certain symptoms and at a certain stage, is there a chance of any of that being reversed, or is it just don't know? Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we are given the impression that dementia is a one-way, slippery slope, just until you're 6 foot under, and that's nonsense. It can be halted, it can be reversed. We have to look at the mechanisms. It's the old story. We have to ask the question why they've got dementia. Is it poor energy delivery mechanisms? Is it poor blood supply? Is it toxic metals? Are they being poisoned by chemicals? And all these things are treatable. So, yeah, we just have to do it all, and there's no reason at all why you shouldn't see benefits.
Oh, fingers crossed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sue.
Hi, I don't know if you're talking to me. Hi, yeah.
Yeah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Actually, I am a researcher in prion disease. I want to make that clear to start with. Because there's just a few points with your talk. You were saying that they didn't get kuru from eating brains. That's not actually correct.
No, that's right. That's the point I was trying to make. You don't get kuru from eating brains.
You do get it from eating brains. What happened in the foray people was that the men didn't participate in the feasts. The women were the ones who ate the feast. The men may have a very small amount of muscle, but didn't eat the brains generally, but the women would eat the whole bodies and would invite the women from the other villages to eat the bodies because it was the female role within their religion, as it were.
Okay, well, I'll go back to the Gastritis paper where I read this. Yeah. And I understood it was the inoculation of the prime material into that caused the problem, because they couldn't repeat this in another, in other work.
Yeah, no, the Gastritis work was very, very early. I've met Carlton myself when he was still alive. I also know Mike Alpers personally, and Jerome Whitfield, who was based in Papua New Guinea for a number of years, and I myself have analysed material from kuru patients, and all of these study done has shown that it was through ingestion. And also if you have mice and you feed them prion infected material, you can infect mice, you can infect animals by feeding them material. And in the BSE epidemic, it wasn't just humans that came down with variant CJD. There were also animals within zoos that were fed contaminated meat.
Yeah, but there is also another theory which I subscribe to, which has to do with organophosphate poisoning. And you're probably aware of Mark Purdy's work, and I think and those animals in zoos also received organophosphates as part of their veterinary control. So I know I subscribe to the organophosphate theory of prion disease.
Thank you.
We'll have to choose the diff on that one.
Yes, Katerina.
Thank you, Sarah. It's very interesting. I realise with this question I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, but why is it that if homocysteine is so relevant to so many conditions that it isn't tested more in the NHS?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. It strikes me that doctors are now being educated by Big Pharma. And Big Pharma's mantra is a patient cured is a customer lost. They are not interested in effecting cures. They're interested in selling drugs, ideally symptom suppressing drugs for life. And you look at heart disease, you look at the cause of cancer, you look at the cause of arthritis, gut disease, none of these causations are being addressed. It's all symptom suppression with drugs. So, we believe that our doctors are there to help us individually as persons to cure ourselves. And the fact of the matter is that for many doctors, that is not the case. And many doctors, like myself, like Dr. Chandy, like Rachel Brown, like other doctors, we get into terrible trouble with the powers that be and told, well, you're not allowed to use vitamin B12. I've been prosecuted on 8 separate occasions by the General Medical Council for my advocacy of vitamin B12. One of the funny things that came out of one of my Freedom of Information Act searches to the GMC is that they state in there, the problem with the Myhill cases is that all the patients are better and none of them will give witness statements against her. So, the GMC itself is not interested in patients. So my view is that my job, as the word doctor comes from the Latin, it means to teach, and my job is to teach you to become your own doctor, to look at what your symptoms are, to work out for yourself what the underlying mechanisms are, and then to put in place the necessary interventions, because only you can do that. And I'm using, as I call it, the tools of the trade that are available to everybody, that are relatively inexpensive. Everybody can, change their diet. Everybody can afford a few nutritional supplements. And so I'm looking for the most frictionless, direct route to recovery for people when I'm seeing them.
Yeah, so thank you, Sarah. I agree with that. I'm the CEO of the Pernicious Anemia Society. So obviously, for people with pernicious anemia, supplements in themselves not always the answer. But I think you're absolutely right about pharma. But one of my concerns related to this as well is that obviously, while we're teaching everybody to self-help themselves, and obviously they need to feel better, some people are very debilitated by B12 deficiency, lose their jobs, their life and all this sort of thing, is that we're also sort of damaging the opportunity to research and find good evidence. So I'm not expecting there's a sort of perfect answer. I just flag that as a point that once people are on supplements, it's very difficult then to conduct accurate research about B12.
Yeah, but my view is the research has all been done. We know so much about B12, its mode of action, how it works, and what we should be doing now is putting that into practical reality. And I mean, this is how Big Pharma play. They say, oh, well, you might be right, but let's do more research. And that means the whole issue is postponed and the bucket is kicked down the road. We know what B12 does. We know its biochemistry, intimately. And when I see a patient, my responsibility is that person. I want to get that person right as quickly as I can. It's not my job to do more research. And actually, the best research in the world is always going to be the case history. Because placebo-controlled double-blind trials, okay, they sound very wonderful, they sound very good, but they're so easy to fudge. They're so easy to fix. And there's a wonderful statistician in America called John Ioannidis, who reckons that over 98% of all medical research is faulty. Because as they say, there's lies, damned lies, and statistics. All these drug research programs are set up by pharmaceuticals because they've got the money, and they are not going to bankroll a study that's going to come up with a negative result. They don't do blue sky research, as I call it. And my view is this has got to be a grassroots revolution. And we've got to teach people and make people aware of what the symptoms and problems are of associated with B12 deficiency, and then give them the tools of the trade so they can sort themselves out. Because B12 is so wonderfully safe. It's so wonderfully non-toxic, and lives are being lost, and decades are being lost because people are not being properly treated. Sorry, I feel rather passionate about that, so that was a bit of a rant, so sorry about that.
Oh, totally agree.
Sally on her iPhone.
Yes, thank you. I've just had to plug in my phone because the charger was going. Sarah, first of all, I would just like to thank you so much. You are an absolute godsend. I agree with, well, I've researched a lot of stuff myself over the years, and through many of the things you're saying, I've become my own physician, or I'm learning, obviously, but what a godsend you are. Just a couple of things that somebody brought up on our WhatsApp chat yesterday about what type of magnesium to take and how much. I actually have been taking magnesium for years. It was the first thing really that I started taking before I understood about the B12. Can you see me? Because the screen's gone blank.
No, but I can hear you.
Oh, that's okay. I actually take two different types. I take taurine and magnesium malate, but it definitely helped me. So that's the first thing I would ask about.
Well, the most important thing with magnesium is to take vitamin D, because without vitamin D, you don't absorb it well. And to say, I like everybody to take vitamin D, 10,000 IU.
Yes, I do that.
Great.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So, what do you think of the taurine and the malate? I take taurine in the morning.
Both excellent. I mean, the key is to have a form of magnesium that's absorbable, and that's absorbed well. By contrast, magnesium oxide is not absorbed at all well.
Okay.
Magnesium sulfate is not that well absorbed. Magnesium chloride, you'll get some absorption. Magnesium citrate, you'll get some absorption. But those salts often taste revolting. So you're better off having a pill like a taurate or a malate or whatever.
Okay, thank you. The other thing was just really to mention, I always used to get confused with Alzheimer's and dementia. You're saying two different things, and I never really. My father died from either dementia, Alzheimer's, and his brother died 2 days later of the same thing, and their sister also died a year later. So our family, there's 5 children in my family. Everybody, they were sort of saying, oh, we're all going to get dementia. And I said, well, I'm not, because I sort of was on the journey already about believing that there are ways to prevent it. But I did think it was interesting that they did all end up dying from that.
Well, my guess is that they've all got a homocysteine problem or had a homocysteine problem, because that runs very strongly in families.
Okay.
And this again is another important clinical point. If you have families who develop heart disease in their 50s, dementia in their 60s, cancer in their 50s, then homocysteine, you must check that, because it runs in families. Easy test to do, and it's easy to fix as well. And if you have a high homocysteine, then all your first degree relatives must be screened.
Oh, right. Thank you very much for that. That's great, Sarah. Thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Annie Barr, you've got your hand up.
Hi, Sarah. Wonderful to actually meet you, and wonderful to hear what you've got to say. I think we're twins, must be sisters from another mister, because you just echo everything I say. It's like watching myself. So I run health hubs all through the UK, and we do homocysteine testing as well. So if anybody's interested in that, London, Cork, Jedburgh in Scotland, where I am right now, and Gateshead near Newcastle. We do point of care testing, and we also do the blood labs. So
thank you. Would you be kind enough to send me that link, because I need to tell my patients that as well. So how can I put my patients in contact with that?
Maybe maybe somebody would do that. Who's in charge? Hugo?
Or what's the name of the website that they could get in touch with?
So it's on the chat. It is on the chat already. It's AB
Oh.
Health Hubs.
abhealthhub.com.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Is it healthhub.com or healthhubs.com?
Yeah, Health Hub.
Okay,
abhealthhub.com.
healthhubs.com isn't working, so drop the S for those people who've taken it off the chat.
Thank you. That's incredibly
healthhub.com.
helpful.
Yeah, Sarah, and I can agree with you. I've got several patients. I give B12 injections as well, and I tend to try not to get a sort of dependent group. I try and actually teach people how to do their own injections. So they come and see me for a consultation, which they obviously have to pay for, and then then I'll teach them at their pace, or their nearest and dearest, or whoever it is that that requires the injection. Then I'll teach them how to do it. I can do that mainly. I try to do it face to face, but I can do it on Zoom if people are struggling. I look after the Benedictine nuns around the world, and let me tell you, it's quite interesting. I just want to give you a little taster of what life is like, and I'm sure yours is pretty similar. But 4 weeks ago, I was doing some training. My other company, I run training for professional development for doctors and nurses, and I was doing a course for them on sort of chronic disease management and how to look after it with the natural route. Okay, and so I'd just written the course, and I was delivering it to these nuns to teach them how to look after themselves, and one of the nuns has had well, she's nearly blind, really. Just optic nerve damage, and I gave her a B12 injection, and tell you, within 30 minutes her eyesight came back. 30 minutes. And I thought, I couldn't quite believe it. I'd never seen that before. And then the next morning, 10:30, the sight went again, and I gave her another B12, half an hour, 20 minutes this time. I gave her methylcobalamin the second time. 20 minutes later it came back, and I was like, and she's continued now. She's back in France, and she's injecting once a week, because I taught her how to do it. But all I'm saying is, look, you can read all the research. I've done research, I've read it and all the rest of it, but like you, I just want to get on with it. I just want, research can be done by somebody else, and you can spend 3 years looking at this and looking at that. That's absolutely fine. Enjoy yourself, while I just try and help the population that's with me. So kind of that's my hymn sheet, really, is very similar. I know what's going on with Big Pharma. My 87-year-old father, long story short, 33 tablets he was on a day. And I've taken him off everything with his GP, which has been rather nice. Just, ticking along. And now he's on iron and warfarin. That's it, kaput. Off gabapentin, amitriptyline, statins, the works, you can imagine. And he's never been this healthy as he is right now. And he's also using Celtic salt.
Fantastic. And I couldn't agree more with you, Emily. I look after an old boy who, guess what, lives in my granny flat, and I feed him a paleo-ketogenic diet, and he's now 101 and a half. He'll be 102 this year.
Fantastic.
And he's as sharp as a tack.
Yep.
He remembers everything, his war, throughout the war, every detail of every naval engagement he's took part in. So we can keep people well right up to a great age.
Yes, I mean, he's at the bridge club tonight, put it that way. He's one of the top bridge players. And, 6 months ago, that wouldn't be possible. So it does work. And, and I just want to say thank you so much for doing what you do. I know all about you. I've read about you for years. So anyway, I'll shut up. So thanks.
Brilliant. Well done. What did you get your MBE for?
Oh, I got the MBE for introducing primary care services to China.
Oh, how interesting.
So I was working with Xi Jinping and his government, and looking with the British government, looking at strategies for older people, and chronic disease, and a bit, mainly a primary care focus. I don't know about primary care out there, so I was part of that.
Incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue, you got your hand up.
Hello. I've got autoimmune gastritis or pernicious anemia. And obviously I suffer with low stomach acidity, and I wondered how that might affect the rest of my gut and the gut microbiome, because you were talking about upper gut fermentation. And do you think that that will be an issue with people who've got low acidity in their stomach? I mean, I self-inject B12 now, but had to take it on myself because I just don't get enough from the NHS, and it just, you know, but the more as I've got older, I find I need more.
Correct.
And so I just keep jabbing away, but I do wonder about the rest of the gut and the microbiome and the digestive side of things, because I don't have the acidity in the stomach.
Correct, but you can you have a very good chance of improving that acidity by doing a low carbohydrate paleoketogenic diet, because what often causes that acidity is hypochlorhydria, is the lining of the stomach gets colonized by bacteria and by yeast, and those microbes can only run on sugars and carbohydrates. So if you do a ketogenic diet, so which is low in carbohydrates, high in fat and fiber, normal amounts of protein, and then you kill those microbes with vitamin C and with iodine, you have a very good chance of restoring normal acidity. Now, an acid stomach is very important, because without an acid stomach, you malabsorb minerals, and that's a risk factor for osteoporosis and many other conditions. So carry on injecting the B12. Do the B12 injections as often as you need clinically. The B12 doesn't depend on what the blood test shows. It depends on how you feel. And some people need daily injections. Patrick Kingsley, when he was treating multiple sclerosis patients, would sometimes inject up to 5 or 10 milligrams every day in order to get a clinical response. So do that, but do a ketogenic diet. And say take vitamin C 5 grams in the morning, iodine 3 drops of 15% Lugol's iodine at night. Both those contact kill all microbes. You can very easily test to see if you have hypochlorhydria by doing the bicarbonate burp test. So if you first thing in the morning when you wake up, if you put half a teaspoon of bicarbonate, baking powder in a glass of water and drink it down, you should burp within 2 or 3 minutes. If you don't burp, that suggests you have hypochlorhydria. And in that event, you should probably take an acid supplement with food in order to give yourself a nice acid stomach. Now, some people swear by acid cider vinegar, and for some that does a very good job. It's a very cheap way of improving your digestion. But for the yeast allergics, they may react to that. Or you can take betaine hydrochloride, maybe 550 milligrams, maybe a gram, with a meal, in order to give you the stomach a window of time when it's acid, in order to restore normal gut function. But you're absolutely right, an acid stomach is really important.
I've been trying cider apple vinegar with mother, and trying that recently. I did find that taking the beta hydrochloride seemed to make my stomach get sore. But one of my problems is that I was B12 deficient for so long that I think it affected my digestive motility. And so for me, fiber is quite an issue, because if I have things that are terrifically fibrous, they can almost like lodge in my stomach, because I've lost that peristalsis, or that squeezing mechanism to move the food along. So I have to kind of balance that sort of level of fiber. So I just feel that my whole gut, I mean, everybody talks about peripheral neuropathy and hands and feet tingling, but they forget about the autonomic nervous system.
Correct.
And that can be badly affected by prolonged B12 deficiency. And for me, it's affected the whole of my gut motility. I just don't seem to have that peristalsis mechanism working properly.
Again, you would be well advised to check your homocysteine, because it's not just B12 that's necessary for the methylation cycle. It's also folic acid, and that needs to be in the methylated form as methyl tetrahydrofolate.
Yeah, I take that.
Great. And pyridoxal 5-phosphate?
I don't take that, no.
Okay, well, that's the methyl form of vitamin B6, but you need all those components for effective methylation. And methylation is responsible for healing and repair. And if you've damaged autonomic nerves, then that might be really important. And another vital vitamin for any autonomic damage is vitamin B1. And you can take that as benfotiamine, 1 gram daily.
Right.
So again, any sort of neuropathy, including autonomic neuropathy, B12, B6, B5, B1 are absolutely vital.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Leslie.
Oh, hello there. Fabulous to listen to your expertise. Thank you. It's something that, sort of I've been looking into for a long time. All I wanted to ask, and I don't know whether you know about this, but my husband's got very high ferritin levels at the moment, which is obviously linked to inflammation. It was over 1,000 last year, and it's down to about 400 now. And they keep monitoring him, and at one point his B12 was 190. And then the next, exactly 10 off. And then at the next one, it was 300. But I think I've more or less you've answered my query. He needs to get his homocysteine levels tested, doesn't he?
Absolutely. But that level of B12 is still far too low. And has the iron been brought down because he's had phlebotomy? He's had had given blood?
No, they've not. I've been nagging him to ask them. No, they haven't done that at all. They've actually sent his blood off to a haematologist now, but we're waiting on another blood test in March. They've just been monitoring for about 18 months now, and I've been sort of trying to tell him.
Okay, well, 400 isn't too awful, but you're absolutely right. If it's over 1,000, that's hemochromatosis, and that needs bringing down PDQ.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. But I think from the two, you and Annie, at least I know now where to get the homocysteine tested.
Yeah.
And we can do that as well as my daughter, because it's my daughter who's on the B12 injections. So, sort of obviously she's a different topic, but I just wanted to ask you on that with the high ferritin levels. It's just knowing what the balance is, because I keep saying to my husband, please take B12 because it won't hurt your iron stores, it can only help it.
Yes,
it can only help the high ferritin.
Correct.
But he's very dubious about what to take. So
why does he have high ferritin? Is he a meat eater, having got a meat, or
no? Yes, he eats. I think he's had an inflammatory illness in the past. I do think it's
okay. Well, high ferritin is also an inflammatory marker, and it may well be that his ferritin's come down because he's done something else that's helped his inflammation, and therefore ferritin's come down for that reason.
That's right, because he lost a lot of weight and didn't want to eat at one point. And touch wood, the tiredness and the eating's coming back. But I still think he's definitely B12 deficient.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But also sort of with Annie as well and yourself, it's just finding I need to know where I can get source B12 from, because I do want to push my daughter for her to self-inject.
Oh, I said it on my website, sales@drmyhill.co.uk.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
at the moment it's hydroxycobalamin on there. We struggle to get methylcobalamin. I do have a limited amount of methylcobalamin. If I have someone who has got a high homocysteine that's not coming down with injected hydroxy, then I can let them have some methylcobalamin in order to help that.
Okay, lovely. Oh, this is it, because my daughter, I'm going on probably taking somebody else's time. My daughter got terrible acne on the back of her B12 injections, and I don't know whether you've ever come across that.
Yes, that is a common side effect of the B12. It happened once with a farmer I was treating, who got so much better on the B12 injection, but he developed this awful acne. Yeah. And he said, well, I feel so much better with the B12, I'm prepared to put up with the acne. And eventually the acne did clear away. Now, there's a wonderful book that you might like your daughter to read called The Hidden Cause of Acne by Melissa Gallico. Now, she was super bright, working for the FDA in intelligence. And the first thing she did, of course, was do a paleo-ketogenic diet, because the work done by Lorraine Cordain essentially showed that people eating a PK diet did not get acne. Now, that improved her acne about 80%, but she was still left with cysts. And in her travels around the world, she found out that when she was staying in one part of the world, her cystic acne would clear up completely. But when she came home, it recurred. And to cut a very long story short, she demonstrated very clearly that her acne was due to fluoride toxicity. And as soon as she cut all the fluoride out of her water and they got rid of the dental fluoride treatments and the fluoride toothpaste and then her acne cleared up completely. Now she has set up a website called The Hidden Cause of Acne.
Yeah.
And The Hidden Cause of Acne, and she's also written a book called The Hidden Cause of Acne. But you want to immerse yourself in fluoride because it's nasty, toxic stuff. And I think acne is the allergic response to fluoride. And maybe the B12 has triggered a fluoride detox. And as the fluoride comes out through the skin, it's driving a cystic acne. And I say that because my immediate reaction to fluoride toxicity would be prescribe iodine, because iodine would displace fluoride from the body to get rid of it. But what she points out is in her book, when she tried iodine, even in tiny doses, it made the acne much worse because it was so good at mobilizing fluoride. So she had to start with a very low dose of iodine and gradually build it up until she could tolerate it.
Wow, because it's been a strange journey, because she got the acne originally and eventually, and it kept coming and going. And I do think it's because she didn't have injections often enough to keep her homocysteine levels down, because I was sure it was the toxins, homocysteine coming out of her skin and mixed in with the bacteria. But this recent, so she had isotretinoin for a year.
Don't have that. It's a horrible drug.
I know. And now you go back to the dermatologist and say, well, we can't give it anymore. You have to be. And you're thinking, you know, they monitored my daughter's health on isotretinoin and now they're not listening to her. And basically now it's all in her scalp and the scalp's been burning. So it's gone from her face to her scalp. And get
on the paleo-ketogenic diet and get all fluoride out of the water. Tea, it's a lot in tea. Tea leaves contain fluoride. Toothpaste, and that will clear up completely.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Bless
My
you.
pleasure.
Take care.
Homer.
Hello. I've known of your work for a long time, but I've never consulted you. My diagnosis, sadly, from the 1990s is chronic fatigue syndrome. And in the last couple of years, I've discovered pathologies that seem to explain my superficial diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, which nobody wants to review. Something I've got, which you might be interested in, is I have low calcidiol levels, which is, calcidiol is the prohormone of the vitamin D metabolite, which is measured in the UK.
Absolutely.
And the obvious conclusion by almost every practitioner in the UK is, you've got vitamin D deficiency. Well, for a start, it's a hormonal system. We're measuring the prohormone. And the people who've talked about this are saying, the people who've really been looking into this for decades are saying, the one it becomes, the prohormone is converted to the active hormone, what's the level of that? And mine is very high towards the end of the upper limit when you use the correct range. So this signature of low prohormone and high active hormone is pointing to something. It's pointing to something called a VDR dysfunction. I don't know whether you talk about that. I want to move on to the other pathologies. The second thing I found is I've got very high insulin, fasting insulin levels.
Okay.
There's hyperinsulinemia, which is very well explained by our high carbohydrate diet. So the keto paleo diet approach is working for me. My fasting insulin levels are coming down. The third thing I discovered, and this was done as a mishap, I spoke with my doctor and said, could I have hyperinsulinemia? In which case, which safe drug will help to reduce it? And she, in her wisdom, said, metformin. Now, metformin did a fine job for a few months and then got me into a lot of trouble because I now know, in hindsight, it made my already present but unidentified vitamin B12 deficiency much worse. So I got other symptoms of B12 deficiency that I hadn't had for 20, 30 years. Pins and needles in my arms, more restless legs, my sleep apnea becoming worse. And then the supplements didn't help. I got the best quality drops and the best quality sprays. For months, they didn't help. And last May, I went and got some, I went and got a set of 4 jabs. Since then, I've been self-injecting, and my sleep apnea is much better. I would say it's non-existent. I don't need a CPAP machine now. I'm trying to do everything I can. If I just do a quick detour on the magnesium, my understanding is the best and probably the cheapest form of magnesium to take is magnesium chloride, magnesium flakes, and the person who's written about this, and he mentions you in his book, is Mark Serkis, who's written the transdermal magnesium, so people can soak in magnesium chloride. The question I want to ask you, you've got a lot of experience with people who have been superficially or correctly diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. How many of these people, when they've been correctly re-diagnosed with B12 deficiency, hyperinsulinemia, and as a side, having the VDR dysfunction, the vitamin D receptor dysfunction, which gives you the low calcidiol and the high calcitriol signature, how many of them get better with the correct pathology identified, and then those people doing the right things? I've made great strides in the last couple of years, but I'm still a long way off being my healthy self.
Well, the answer to your question is I don't know. Okay. But the point again is that chronic fatigue syndrome is not a diagnosis, it's a clinical picture, and we have to ask the question why. And the analogy that I like to use is the car analogy. And yes, we are basically we are an engine like a car, and to get it all in place, I say, it's like building a house. And I'm delighted that you're doing a paleo-ketogenic diet, because that gives you the right fuel in the tank. And then you have to have good absorption of that from the upper gut by sorting out the upper fermenting gut. And then breathing techniques are important. Now, all these details, I've rewritten my chronic fatigue syndrome book, so we're now on edition 3. And it's actually a shorter version than what went before, because I've just put in there the absolute bare minimum that everybody has to do to follow a path to recovery. If you send me an email, I'll happily send you some early chapters so you can have a read and see how I'm thinking. But the mitochondrial engine is essential. Now, you've mentioned 2 conditions that involve hormone receptor resistance, vitamin D receptor resistance and insulin resistance. And we have to ask the question is why is there resistance? And almost certainly it's because there's something blocking, which might be a toxic stress, and a common source of toxins are products of the upper fermenting gut. And I also see people who have thyroid hormone receptor resistance, and I think the same applies. And since putting all my patients through this very structured workup, paleo-ketogenic diet, sort out the upper fermenting gut, breathing techniques and oxygen, correct the mitochondrial dysfunction, look at the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox, then so often, and this all involves detoxing, so often the hormone resistance syndromes just melt away. So rather than trying to say, I think it's a bit of this or a bit of that or a bit of the other, we do the whole package and work our way through it. And if somebody's got symptoms of inflammation, i.e., swollen lymph nodes, headaches, gut pain, arthritis, fibromyalgia, then that tells me that the immune system is also activated. And we have to ask, why is the immune system activated? Maybe for reasons of allergy, possibly autoimmunity, but so often chronic infection. And once you've got one chronic infection on board, then you're much more likely to have other chronic infections. Dr. Armin describes this as having co-infections. So it's not just that you've got chronic Epstein-Barr virus, or just varicella zoster, or mycoplasma, or Lyme disease, or fungal infection. You've got the whole shooting match. And so the first approach is to try to reduce the total infectious load, not just, the antimicrobial for Epstein-Barr virus or the antibiotic for mycoplasma, because so often that just doesn't work. So that's all detailed in the book. And you know, obviously I'd love you to buy a copy. My publisher would be awfully pleased. But if you send me an email, then I'm very happy to send you the early chapters so you can see how I'm thinking. But as I say, it's a very well walked path to recovery, and the majority of people do very well on this regime. And it's very simple. Everybody can do it.
I think that sounds great. I've certainly benefited from the lowering the carbohydrate intake. The sort of things I was doing in the past, thinking they were healthy, really was guided by NHS advice. The sort of guidance that we should eat at least 5 pieces of fruit and veg a day is just too broad, just ridiculously too broad. You need to pick your low carb veg and knock out the fruit completely.
Correct.
You know, so when I was a student, I was eating bran flakes and skim milk, which was just disastrous, absolutely disastrous. It's taken me decades to actually work out how bad the advice was. Now I want to get better. I also think that we need to somehow hold the people who are continuing with the bad advice to account. So there's a very separate question I'll ask you is, are there likely to be any successful challenges through the law courts about misguided advice over decades, or is that something you'd rather not get involved in?
Bless you. I have pursued a legal action against the authors of the PACE study since they published that in 2011. And I've been through the courts, to the GMC, to the Information Commissioner. I've had endless court hearings, and they are extremely well defended. And it got to the point where I was told if I pursue this anymore, I will be told I'm a vexatious client and get a criminal record, essentially. So, no, we're not going to batter these people into submission. It's just not going to happen legally. This has got to be a grassroots revolution. This has got to be groups like this I'm talking to today, and I do endless talks like this to groups like you, and it's you guys have got to work it out for yourself from first principles. And my job is, as I call it, to give you the rules of the game and the tools of the trade so you can do it yourself. It's a shameful state of affairs. I'm now ashamed to be a doctor. I'm very happy being a naturopathic physician because I can speak my mind and get people well safely and effectively.
Just one quick question on B12 injections. As the inflammation comes down, in simple terms, I'm thinking of B12 as a mop-up molecule for homocysteine, MMA. As the inflammation comes down and these toxic molecules go down to their normal levels, is it possible in the longer term to come off the B12 injections to gradually reduce the dose and the frequency?
Yes, it's possible, but I have a hardcore of my patients who know they need a jab every week or every month or whatever in order to retain wellness, and that's fine by me. And it may be that they have a genetic mutation that means that they just simply can't utilize B12 efficiently. But judge the dose and the frequency of injections not according to blood tests or any other tests, but according to how you feel. The clinical input is always more important than the biochemistry. The biochemistry gives us useful clues, but at the end of the day, it's trial and error, suck it and see. But my experience is once people get on these regimes, once they're well keto adapted, they're up to speed with cheap interventions like the vitamin C, the iodine, sorting out their mitochondria, simple detoxing, then their need for micronutrients does decline.
Thank you very much, Dr. Myhill.
My pleasure. Julie.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And you.
Hi, Sarah. Can I just say that it was music to my ears when you said the most important question is why. But what I'd also say that to everybody is you can ask why a lot, and it's only when you go through a journey to realise that why is not answered. You know, I've got a 10-year journey to date, and first diagnosed with pneumonia, pleurisy and pericarditis, could not get diagnosed through the NHS, kept telling me I had a virus, go home, you're absolutely fine. Went to a private doctor who did a whole batch of bloods, and in among that was homocysteine, which was raised at 12.1.
Oh, now,
that was 10 years ago. I, at that point, trusted the medics. I gave the blood test to my GP. I gave the blood test to the hematologist looking after me. I didn't realise then what I know now, that I should have been nagging in a different way at that point. Now, my B12 always ran high in bloods. I now understand why it may have run high, and I asked why again and again and again, and was told that B12 was unimportant, B12 was non-diagnostic, and B12 doesn't tell you anything. You're obviously eating too much.
They're not allowed to do it.
So as I, over a number of years, started more investigation, and had a hunch that B12 was part of what was going on with me. I first of all went to my GP and went, I am suspicious there's a B12 deficiency here. Don't be silly, Julie, it can't possibly be. And I said, no, but look, I've macrocytic anemia for 8 years. You know, my MCV has run high. You know, I've got all of these symptoms which can be part of, and I've got 5 other relatives with a variety of B12 issues. Well, I was sent away with a flea in my ear. My medical record was put, advised patient that it could not be B12 deficiency and not to listen to charities and only to listen to medics.
Dear, dear.
You know, that's on my record. I will perhaps yet to issue with it. But one of the things that I think probably just to say to everybody is that question why is so important, but don't let yourself be fobbed off, because I then went to a professor of haematology for other issues that were ongoing as well and said, I'm suspicious, to which she said, don't think it's the whole answer, Julie, but let's do the test today. My homocysteine was 24.
Oh.
My MMA was over 1,000. So I got the 6 doses as you would get from the NHS. I got slightly better and went, wait, hey, this is good. Within a week of the 6 doses stopping, I completely crashed to a level which was just completely unacceptable, which is when I started self-injecting. Now, you know, the GP doesn't know I'm doing it, even though it's in clinic letters because they don't read them. The professor of haematology said, I can see the difference in you. You're doing the right thing and keep doing it, which is exactly what you want. So it was that kind of say, thank you for saying why. And to everybody, don't be fobbed off without getting why answered properly. Yep, I guess that's what I would say.
100%. Well done, you. Keep digging. I mean, what I do, which some of you may interest, is I do Zooms where I speak all day. And I start at 9:30 in the morning and speak through till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Wow. And we max out at 20 people. And the deal is anybody can ask any question at any time. The bad news, it costs £40 for a ticket, but it's we do cover a lot of ground. And what I also run, which is good fun, is we have workshop weekends at my place. So people turn up on a Thursday night. We feed you an organic PK diet for the weekend, and then there's cooking demonstrations, gardening, and then I talk all day, and then we detox in the hot tub and the sauna and the eco pool. So it's a lot of fun. And if anybody would like to join me for that weekend, we just done one finally this weekend. We had a lovely time. Then please just get in touch with me or see on my website and book a ticket.
Yes. Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Great. My Zoom's got I'm not sure who you are, My Zoom, but you've got your hand up, so do ask your question.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, a little bit off topic. So I've got kids with allergies, all sorts of tree nuts, or one's got a random coconut, and you know, I always asking the question why, but there's very little negotiation there, and obviously there's the extreme fear of anaphylaxis, right? So you always live with that fear. You don't want to be the parent that then tries it on, right? However, we've been pushing and pushing, and now we're doing this oral immunization therapy, which actually is going quite well. Strangely, the basis under which that is being delivered goes against everything you're being told to do, not to do before. What I wanted to check was, you know, what's the why? What's the why? You know, why are both of my kids going down this line? I've got none. My wife's got none. You know.
My guess is it's vaccination. The three big risk factors for autoimmunity and allergy are vaccines, Western diets, which are high in sugar and carbohydrates, which is very pro-inflammatory, and vitamin D deficiency. Because we're all being told, you know, oh, children shouldn't go into sunshine because they get skin cancer, which is complete tosh. So, you know, we should all be taking 10,000 IU of vitamin D daily. It's one of the most important anti-inflammatories in the body. Cut out all processed foods which are high in linoleic acid, in particular, which is nasty. So that's seed oils. Don't cook with sunflower oil or rapeseed oil or corn oil. They're very markedly pro-inflammatory. Cut out sugars and carbohydrates, which are markedly pro-inflammatory, and take vitamin D and vitamin C. And that gives you a good chance of just quietening the immune system down. Because all those things put the immune system into a twitchy, inflamed state. And there's no question that vaccines are at the bottom of this.
Is there any particular one? Because I mean, obviously, one of my daughters, she'd only had the kind of baby vaccines, and she had originally had an egg allergy at 1 year old. Whereas my other daughter had everything, and because the other child didn't have it, we didn't really have everything in the house. And so she developed it when she was 10. But then we do eat quite an Asian vegetarian diet, so it's not that high in, and all of the food is freshly made, etc. But yes, we do use sunflower oil now that you point it out. But yeah, okay. I mean, there's no other. How can I put it? You know, it's not something like B12 or it's something, you know. But we can't reverse the vaccine, is that?
No, you can't. I mean, the trouble with the immune system is it's very easy to switch it on and it's very difficult to switch it off. And as I say, the number one switching on are vaccines. But the environment, I mean, and again, being Asian, if you have a darker skin, you're more likely to be vitamin D deficient because we make vitamin D from the action of sunshine on our skin, and having dark skins, you know, reduces that, slows the efficacy. The point here is humans evolved on the equator with dark skins. And then as we migrated away from the equator, though we had to evolve paler skins so we can make vitamin D more quickly following sun exposure. And those with the darker skins didn't survive. So it just illustrates the importance of sunshine in our life. And if you can't get sunshine, then do take vitamin D. I mean, none of us get sufficient vitamin D in the winter. We should all be taking, as I say, 10,000 IU daily. And it's a very good anti-inflammatory.
Even 10,000 for kids?
Well, if they're a bit smaller, you'd reduce the dose depending on their size. So, you know, a baby might give 1,000 IU, and then a child maybe 5,000 IU. But it's lovely, safe stuff and so important for our health. But cut out all the processed foods. You know, do not cook with seed oils like sunflower seed oil or rapeseed oil. We should always cook with saturated fats. So coconut oil, meat fat, palm oil, they're saturated fats. Use olive oil on French dressings or whatever, because that's a monounsaturated, so that's probably the safest oil. But again, you know, some olive oils are mixed with other oils, or they're contaminated, or they're not cold pressed, and therefore they become toxic as well. So you know, it's a difficult thing to navigate, but the diet is absolutely paramount.
Yeah, is the jury out on ghee? Ghee, clarified butter.
Ghee. Oh no, ghee's perfect. So long as you're not dairy allergic, then butter and ghee are perfect fats to cook with.
Stick with what we had before, so basically, okay, thank you.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Andy.
Phenomenal. You're phenomenal. I can't believe anyone is as clever as you've been.
It's not that I'm clever, it's just I'm gobby and I talk about it all the time.
It's wonderful, wonderful. About 5 or 6 years ago, Susan and I went down to the Houses of Parliament on the B12 issue. Dr. Chandy, we went for Dr. Chandy, and we got 37 MPs to agree with us, and the majority of them were from Northern Ireland. Guess where they don't have a B12 problem anymore?
Oh, brilliant.
The Northern Ireland ones, we still got them, but Northern Ireland haven't.
Fantastic.
Like that.
Good for you. Sue, you got another question?
I just wanted to ask two things really. One was about the effect of COVID. Certainly since I got COVID, I find that I do need a lot more B12, and I developed an awful lot of other problems like developing shingles and all sorts of gastric upsets and various other things. So I wondered how much COVID was affecting the population in terms of things like B12. And the other question I wanted to just ask was, why is it so difficult in this country for us to have B12 available as an injectable, you know, off prescription? Because while ever we have to go by the NHS and it's on prescription, we're just never going to get adequate treatment. And it's always a question of worrying about the supply issue. You know,
I know.
Having to get it from Germany or wherever. And, you know, this is one of the things that just causes such a lot of anxiety with people who need this drug. It's the availability.
Well, first of all, it's not a drug, it's an essential nutrient. And you're absolutely right. And I worry about that too. And the reason is, of course, sales are all run by Big Pharma. And the last thing Big Pharma wants is fit, healthy people. It wants lots of people with diseases requiring symptom-suppressing medication. And B12 is far too cheap. You know, they can't make money at it. So you're absolutely right. You know, it's a real problem. In respect to your COVID question, one of the problems with COVID is that it activates underlying infections that were hitherto the immune system was coping with fine. So, for example, we all tend to pick up herpes infections throughout our life, like chickenpox, like Epstein-Barr virus, like cold sores or whatever. But if we've got an immune system that's in tip-top condition, then it has those viruses on board and it keeps them at bay. It stops them rearing their ugly heads. But COVID, when that comes along, it interferes with our immunity, and very often these underlying infections then rise up and become a problem again. B12 is a good antiviral, and my guess is that you've reactivated underlying infections. So it's a little bit like having ME, which is chronic fatigue syndrome with low-grade infection. And the B12 is helping to keep those infections in check. So you just take as much B12 as you need, and then do check your homocysteine in order to make sure you've got sufficient folic acid and pyridoxal 5-phosphate to balance up the B12 that you're taking.
Vina, I'm going to hand over to Sammy.
Hello. Thank you for like the most amazing talk ever. Thank you so much. I've had a good peruse through your website already because I heard, I think you were on the Academy of Physical Medicine some time ago as a speaker there as well. I just have one quick question. What is the ideal supplement dosage for the rest of the B vitamins? I'm already taking B12 via a sublingual spray, which is 1,000 micrograms, but I was just wondering the rest of the B vitamins, what's the ideal supplement dosage, and where or what company should you be using to get a B complex?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you go to a good vitamin company like BioCare or Lambert's or Quest, you will get a good multi-B vitamin from that company. And then, but if there are specific problems, some people need to megadose with particular B vitamins. So, for example, if you have poor energy delivery or schizophrenia, you need to megadose with vitamin B3, maybe up to 1,500 or 3,000 milligrams a day. We talked about B12 megadosing with that. We touched on megadosing with thiamine, vitamin B1. You can take that as the lipid-soluble form, benfotiamine, which is good for, it reverses diabetes. It's very good for insulin resistance. Also very good for any nerve damage, whether it's autonomic nervous, motor nerves, sensory nerves. So, but say base load with a good multivit and then top up with specifics according to the clinical picture.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Homer.
Thank you. I just wanted to recap something we discussed in the last Zoom, and this is thanks to Hugo. Hugo, you'd mentioned you take the adenosine as capsules and they don't work as tablets. Since then, I've had a look on what's available. There's a company called Pure Bio, which has got adenosine capsules, 1 milligram capsules at quite a low price because they're reaching their best before date. I think it's the end of April or something. They may have some bottles left if somebody is looking for the adenosine. I've started those probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I haven't felt any difference yet. My question, Dr. Myhill, is you mentioned that you supply hydroxoform of B12. You touched on supplying the methyl form. You have very low amounts of that. So I'm inferring from that some people have a better response with the active methyl form. I'm now taking the active methyl form after a long time of taking, after a number of months of taking the hydroxoform, and I felt my response to the hydroxoform was waning. So I changed to the methyl form. I'm using the Oxford Bio methyl form. The one thing I do, which I've mentioned in one of these Zooms before, is instead of using the injectable saline, I can dilute the methyl form powder in the Oxford Bio with the ampules of the hydroxoform. Then I get the hydroxomethyl mix. As Hugo does, I was independently using the saline eye wash, which is not supposed to be injectable, but it's got 2 ingredients. It's water and saline, and it's sterile. So I'm using that instead of groveling for a prescription from my GP. Now, what I wanted to know from your experience is, have you found a big difference in people's responses to the hydroxoform injected, the methyl form injected, and do some people also benefit from the adenosine capsules?
Well, broadly speaking, I start everybody off on the hydroxycobalamin because it's so cheap and so easily and readily available. And then after maybe 2 months that I recheck their homocysteine. And if the homocysteine is normal, well, I reckon we're home and dry. And if the patient is better, then I reckon we're home and dry. If the homocysteine is still raised, then we use that. At that point, we use the methylcobalamin, and in order to get the homocysteine down. So that's quite a useful pointer. But I probably don't try as many people on methylcobalamin as I would like to, because it's difficult to get and it's expensive.
Well, the Oxford Bio, it comes in a little bottle. The powder, there's I think 40 milligrams of powder.
Yeah.
Diluted with 10 milliliters of saline. Now, for me, that's about 80 doses. So 80 doses for 40 quid is 50 pence a dose, isn't it?
Send me that link. That's a very useful link. I didn't know that existed.
Oxford Bio.
Thank you.
Oxford Bio. Yeah, and that's, I think people on this forum are familiar with that. That's the one Hugo uses. I don't know whether anybody else wants to chip in with other supplies of the methylcobalamin.
That's incredibly useful.
I think the others are more expensive. There are ampules from Germany, but they're not as they cost more than the Oxford Bio. The only trouble with the Oxford Bio is you're dipping in a new needle each time you open the bottle. But there are ways around that by taking out a certain amount and diluting it in a separate bottle of 10 doses or something, which is what I'm trying to work towards.
Thank you for that. I'll look that up. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Good. Well, I think we've, there's no more questions up anyway, Hugo. I hope I've been useful to you. And if you want to repeat performance, I'm very happy to talk again about any other subject that your group might fancy.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's been absolutely fantastic. A lot of people have expressed their thanks both in the chat and also in private messages to me separately. I'm just about to put up. Well, I'll put up the link for the Oxford Bio. There are actually two concentrations of Oxford Bio. I buy the more expensive, the more concentrated one, and then use smaller quantities of it. So I get 100 injections per bottle.
Oh, brilliant.
Which obviously lasts for me 6 months, which is great.
Yeah.
No, a year I'm on 2 a week, so a year I get out of it. That's very useful. They get around buying it because it's in powder form, so it's not that restricted. Yes, we would like to have you back. We're saying 6 months between speakers so that people get some variety. Next month, March the 11th, it'll be Graham Morris MP, who's the MP for Easington. And if you've seen on our website the patient stories, the videos, he's the interviewer. We're going back 2011, 2012. He's the interviewer there, doing those interviews, and was a phlebotomist in his time. And we'll talk a bit about some of the politics of how to get a new protocol through. He's been an enormous support. In fact, there was a time when I would send him an email saying, here's the sound bite and here's the backup. And I would then read in Hansard within a couple of weeks that he'd asked the question with the sound bite. Great person. And then at some point, April or May, we're having Sally Patchlock on. We've just got to pin her down to it, to a date. And so that's going very well. So thank you very much, Sarah, and we would be delighted to have you back on
Great, look forward to that.
A new topic. What the next topic? I presume it's ME.
Perfect. I can talk about that.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you for inviting me. Great questions, all you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
you,
Sarah.
And remember to save the chat for those people who want it, who want the contents, and the link for the video will come up with the same link as always. It's the YouTube at B12D talks, but it's in the invitation letter that you get each month that reminds you, and we'll let you know when the talk gets published. It has to go through a number of checks before it can finally be published. We can't just say we've got a recording and we're going to put it up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.